Thank you,
It's
Paul.
all yours.
Okay, good. And I'll be talking for maybe 20 or 25 minutes, and then I'll be glad to take questions after that. So let me begin with some very exciting news. On January 22nd, just 5 days from today, the UN Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons will enter into force. This means that the treaty, having been ratified by the requisite number of nations, will become international law. The treaty was adopted by an overwhelming vote of the official representatives of national governments at a UN conference in July 2017 and has now been ratified by 51 nations. It prohibits developing, testing, producing, acquiring, possessing, stockpiling, using, or threatening to use nuclear weapons. The treaty also prohibits the deployment of nuclear weapons on national territory, as well as assistance to any nation in the conduct of these prohibited activities. This means that when implemented, the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons would bring an end to the long nightmare of a future nuclear war, a war that would destroy virtually all forms of life and leave the Earth a charred, radioactive wasteland. Consequently, this abolition of nuclear weapons would provide one of the greatest triumphs for humanity in all history. Unfortunately, though, there's one obstacle to the implementation of the treaty. The governments of the nuclear nations, 9 of them, the United States, Russia, China, Britain, France, Israel, India, Pakistan, and North Korea, have refused to accept it. Back in 2017, when the treaty was adopted at the UN conference, which the nuclear powers refused to attend, the governments of the United States, Britain, and France announced that they would never accept it. And the governments of the other 6 nuclear powers have declared their opposition to the treaty as well. Worse than that, these 9 governments are currently engaged in a massive nuclear arms race, costing a total of roughly $100 billion per year. You might think that this $100 billion per year race to prepare for nuclear war would be viewed as reckless extravagance, particularly given the fact that these 9 nations are in the midst of a surging coronavirus pandemic, causing millions of deaths and the crumbling of their economies. But you would be wrong. For among the governments of these nations, there is no higher priority than developing new and improved nuclear warheads, faster and more accurate nuclear missiles, submarines and bombers, and ramped up nuclear weapons production facilities. Do I exaggerate? Well, let's take a look at a few examples. Russia, which possesses more nuclear weapons than any other country in the world, surpassing the United States, though not by much, has been developing new, improved nuclear missiles and submarines for years. Vladimir Putin, determined to make Russia great again, was particularly scornful of the limits imposed on his country by the 1987 US-Russian Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty. This was in part thanks to the fact that China didn't labor under these constraints, since it wasn't part of this treaty. His government probably was violating the treaty's terms by developing an intermediate range missile when the Trump administration, also eager to strap treaty constraints, seized the opportunity to unilaterally abandon this treaty. This was fine with Putin, who withdrew Russia from the treaty on the next day. Now, both nations, or at least their governments, can look forward to possessing intermediate-range nuclear weapons with greater efficiency in annihilating the people of other lands. In December 2019, the Russian government announced the deployment of the world's first hypersonic nuclear-capable missiles, which Putin boasted could bypass missile defense systems, such as those deployed by the United States, and hit almost any target on the planet. Indeed, the Russian president touted several new Russian nuclear weapon systems as far ahead of their time. He explained, quote, "Our equipment must be better than the world's best if we want to come out as the winners," unquote. Although Russia and the United States together possess about 91% of the world's 13,400 nuclear weapons, China, the number 3 nuclear power, has built up the size of its nuclear forces in recent years and is currently engaged in an impressive nuclear modernization program, enabling it to launch nuclear attacks from air, sea, and land. It is expected to soon have a new strategic bomber and air-launched ballistic missiles in operation. Currently, China has 4 ballistic missile submarines in action, with 2 more under construction. Although the Chinese government favors treaty restrictions on U.S. and Russian intermediate-range nuclear missiles, it opposes any restrictions on its own. Other nations are also busily at work upgrading their nuclear capabilities for nuclear war. India and Pakistan have both escalated their nuclear development programs, with India now possessing land-based, sea-based, and air-launched capabilities. Both nations have markedly increased the number of nuclear warheads in their arsenals, which are of approximately the same size. Although the number of nuclear weapons possessed by Israel is a closely guarded secret, it's believed that the nation has recently enlarged its nuclear arsenal. Britain is building a new fleet of nuclear-armed submarines, while France is also modernizing its nuclear forces. As for North Korea, the latest entrant into the nuclear club, it is busy enlarging its number of nuclear warheads and extending the range of the missiles that can carry them to distant parts of the world. And how about the U.S. government? Donald Trump has always thought that he must be a winner, and this certainly applies to the nuclear arms race and nuclear war. In December 2016, shortly after his election as president, he publicly declared, quote, "Let it be an arms race. We will outmatch them at every pass and outlast them all," unquote. Naturally, he had no use for nuclear disarmament agreements, not only destroying the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty, but withdrawing from the Iran Nuclear Agreement and the Open Skies Treaty. He also let the New START Treaty, which reduced the number of strategic nuclear weapons, lapse. Instead, seizing on the Obama administration's earlier agreement with Senate Republicans to modernize the U.S. nuclear weapons complex, Trump expanded that plan to a $2 trillion extravaganza. It sets the course for the refurbishment of U.S. nuclear weapons production facilities, for the upgrading of current U.S. nuclear weapons, and for the development and deployment of a vast array of new ones. These include the development of a new intercontinental ballistic missile at a cost of $264 billion, and the production and deployment of a new submarine-launched ballistic missile warhead that will make starting a nuclear war easier. The new nuclear weapons are designed to not only win the arms race, but to intimidate other nations and even win a nuclear war. Early in his administration, Trump publicly threatened to obliterate both North Korea and Iran through a nuclear onslaught. Similarly, North Korea's Kim Jong-un has repeatedly threatened a nuclear attack on the United States. Furthermore, the U.S. government has been engaging recently in a game of nuclear chicken with China and Russia, dispatching fleets of nuclear bombers and nuclear warships dangerously close to their borders. Such provocative action is in line with the Trump administration's 2018 Nuclear Posture Review, which expanded possibilities for displays of nuclear resolve, as they like to call it, and the first use of nuclear weapons. Subsequently, the Russian government also lowered its threshold for initiating a nuclear war. Not surprisingly, about a year ago, the editors of the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists reset the hands of their famous doomsday clock at 100 seconds to midnight, the most dangerous setting in its history. You might be asking yourself, whatever happened to nuclear arms control and disarmament? How about the nuclear test ban treaties, the SALT treaties, the START treaties, and all the other actions that rolled back the nuclear menace since its death-dealing debut in August 1945? Those are good questions. Nuclear arms control and disarmament treaties, plus unilateral action, did curb the nuclear arms race. In a world of nearly 200 nations, only 10 of them developed nuclear weapons, although many others could have managed it if they had chosen to do so, including nearly all industrial nations and many non-industrial nations. One of the 10 nuclear nations, South Africa, voluntarily destroyed its nuclear stockpile, reducing the number of nuclear powers to 9. In a world in which 70,000 nuclear weapons were once in existence, more than 80% of them, 56,600 of them, were destroyed. Perhaps most important, nuclear war has not taken place since 1945. From the standpoint of human survival, this is a very substantial achievement. However, before we get too sentimental, remembering the wise statesmen who curbed the nuclear arms race and avoided waging nuclear war, we should recognize that they were responding to massive public pressure to end the nuclear arms race and prevent a nuclear holocaust. Some of the largest popular uprisings of the post-World War II period, led by anti-nuclear movements like the National Committee for Sane Nuclear Policy, Women's Strike for Peace, the Nuclear Weapons Freeze Campaign, Physicians for Social Responsibility, and Peace Action in the United States, and their counterparts around the world, deserve much of the credit for reducing the nuclear menace. They led the way, and fortunately, at least some government officials had the good sense to respond to their demands. I lay out the evidence for the key role played by peace and disarmament groups in fostering this reversal of public policy in my book, Confronting the Bomb. But unfortunately, with the end of the Cold War and the ongoing reductions in nuclear weapons occasioned by nuclear disarmament treaties, a sense of popular complacency set in, and these movements declined in numbers and strength. And this removed much of the pressure for nuclear disarmament measures from government officials. Not surprisingly, many government officials, and particularly those determined to make their countries great again, largely freed from popular pressure, began to indulge their nuclear ambitions and fantasies. And so we're back to a nuclear arms race, and maybe worse. Fortunately, though, all is not lost. There are at least 3 rays of light in this rather gloomy picture that I've been painting for you. First, public opinion polls have consistently shown that most people in all countries dislike nuclear weapons and loathe the very idea of nuclear war. Indeed, the polls reveal that most people around the world favor nuclear arms control, nuclear disarmament, and even the development of a nuclear weapons-free world. All that is missing is popular mobilization. That is, the public is ready, but the public has not been mobilized for massive resistance against this nuclear arms race and a demand for a nuclear-free world. Second, most government leaders of the non-nuclear nations have become fed up with the reluctance of the nuclear powers to divest themselves of their nuclear weapons. And this has finally led them, in an alliance with peace and nuclear disarmament organizations, to craft and bring to fruition the UN Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. After all, although the nuclear powers have the nukes, the other nations have the votes, at least in the United Nations. Third, there are some government officials who possess an understanding of nuclear dangers, a receptivity to popular pressure, and a sensitivity to the views of other nations. Therefore, they are willing to press forward with nuclear arms control and disarmament policies. Some of these government officials are about to take office on January 20th in the United States in the form of the new Biden administration. Joseph Biden has his faults in some areas, but he is a long-time supporter of nuclear arms control and disarmament agreements. During his lengthy career in the U.S. Senate, he backed every anti-nuclear treaty brought before that body. During the Obama administration, in which he served as vice president, he supported the New START Treaty, the Iran nuclear agreement, and the president's inspiring rhetoric, which unfortunately didn't lead to much, about making the establishment of a nuclear-free world U.S. government policy. Also, during the Trump administration, Biden criticized Trump's nuclear recklessness. So, the new president will probably promote measures dealing with nuclear issues that differ very significantly from those of his predecessor. Unfortunately, U.S. ratification of new treaties requires a two-thirds vote of U.S. senators. Therefore, Biden's ability to secure U.S. ratification of new treaties will be severely limited by Senate Republicans, who have grown more and more opposed to nuclear disarmament treaties, and most other treaties, I should add, in recent decades. Even so, Biden can and probably will use executive action to rejoin the Iran nuclear agreement, re-sign the Open Skies Treaty with Russia, block the U.S. production and deployment of particularly destabilizing nuclear weapons, and reduce the enormous budget for U.S. nuclear modernization. Also, there will almost certainly be a new U.S. government emphasis on substituting diplomacy for military action and on ending public threats of nuclear war. Much of this is suggested in the Democratic Party's 2020 election platform and in Biden's public statements. Furthermore, given Biden's past criticism of initiating a nuclear war, he might go beyond Obama and far beyond Trump and issue on his own a no first use policy. That is the United States, he might well say, and he said he would do this. He would say the United States will never be the first to initiate a nuclear war. But you might be asking yourselves, how will Obama deal with the issue I began with, the entry into force of the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons? Unfortunately, I don't think he is going to sign and press for ratification of that treaty, at least not in the near future. One reason for his reluctance is that, given almost certain Republican opposition, there is currently no possibility of securing the necessary two-thirds ratification vote for it in the U.S. Senate. Furthermore, I don't think he's ready to take that big a leap forward in U.S. public policy, at least at this time. However, on the other hand, he might reduce the U.S. government's official opposition to that treaty. Recall that the Trump administration announced that the United States would never, ever comply with or sign that treaty. For example, Biden might scrap the Trump administration's official call for nations to oppose the treaty and announce that in light of the treaties becoming international law on January 22nd, he was forming a commission to study whether the United States should sign and ratify it. This would give him some time and might even give him a positive recommendation. What does all this add up to for you? The looming extinction of most forms of human, animal, and plant life through nuclear war remains one of the great existential problems facing the world today. If we want to prevent some future lunatic like Donald Trump, or even a saner but panicky leader of a threatened nation, from plunging the world into a nuclear holocaust, there's no alternative to getting rid of nuclear weapons. And that won't happen without popular pressure. You can do your part in building this popular pressure by joining an organization, such as Peace Action, that supports this goal. At the least, you can back the forthcoming nuclear arms control and disarmament agreements that will reduce nuclear dangers. Also, you can publicize the importance of the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, a treaty that will soon become international law and someday might well finish the job of saving the world from nuclear annihilation. And wouldn't that be a day for celebration? So thank you very much. I'll be glad to take your comments or questions now. Janine, do you have some questions for me?
I do. I have a couple that came via email. So while people utilize the chat to type in their questions, I will go to those two first. Okay. If we were looking for allies on both a local and a state level for nuclear disarmament or a federal level, who would you recommend that we go to?
Well, I think the obvious allies are Democrats who are in office, as well as those campaigning for office in the future. The Democratic Party, for all its flaws, has championed every nuclear arms control and disarmament agreement. Occasionally there are one or two senators that might fall off. When it comes to the final vote in the Senate, but generally speaking, Democrats have been rather consistently in support of such agreements. From the first, which was pushed through during the Kennedy administration, the Partial Test Ban Treaty, right on to the New START agreement under Obama. The Republicans in the past would sometimes back such treaties, back such agreements, but unfortunately the Republican Party, as it has become more and more right-wing, has also become more and more hostile to nuclear arms control and disarmament. So I don't think there are many Republicans, although there might be some here and there, who are willing to support such treaties or even agreements. But I think that there are enough Democrats who favor them. And by the way, the polls show that although the public generally favors these things, there's overwhelming favorability among Democrats and even support within Republican ranks, but less so. So I think that the easiest people to mobilize will be the Democrats. And indeed, a lot of this happens to be in the Democratic Party's platform for 2020. And Biden has said many of these things. Now, he wants to immediately rejoin the Iran nuclear agreement, that he wants to extend the New START treaty and so on. So I don't think it will be very difficult to mobilize the Democrats for most of this. I think they're going to be warier when it comes to the treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons. But if you're looking for people who might be rallied around that, I would say they'll probably be in the progressive wing of the Democratic Party. I think you'll have a number of those people who are willing right from the start to speak out for it. And I think if asked in public fora, they would say, "Oh yes, we're for that."
This next one's a little long.
Okay.
Jake Sullivan, President-elect Biden's choice for National Security Advisor, says the fact that the major powers have not returned to war with one another since 1945 is a remarkable achievement of American statecraft. Clearly, mutually assured destruction played a large role too. Could you comment on the historical and future relative importance statecraft compared to nuclear threat?
Well, the trilogy that I wrote that was later boiled down into Confronting the Bomb makes the case that a nuclear deterrence, well, all right, it starts off asking, why has the world avoided nuclear war since 1945? Usually nations that have new and powerful weapons use them in their wars. They certainly don't get rid of them until they acquire more powerful weapons. And yet nations haven't waged nuclear war since 1945. How do we account for that fact? Well, there are some people who say that it's been nuclear deterrence that has worked, that nations haven't dared to wage nuclear war against other nations that have nuclear weapons, since they're worried about being nuked themselves, and that has led to a kind of nuclear fear, and therefore the bomb has not been used since 1945, at least used in war. It's certainly been used to try to intimidate other nations. The fact is, though, that there are all sorts of things that contradict that theory. If other nations, for example, are deterred from waging nuclear war by U.S. nuclear weapons, why has the U.S. government been so worried about Iran getting nuclear weapons? Doesn't it know that Iran would be deterred from nuclear war by the threat of being destroyed by the United States? Well, obviously, U.S. government officials don't view Iran as deterrable, or North Korea as deterrable, and so on. They're very worried about these countries waging nuclear war, as well they might be. So that while there might be some value to deterrence, the fact is that no one's counting on it's working. The only way to guarantee that there won't be nuclear war is to get rid of the weapons of war, or those nuclear weapons, and prevent nuclear war. The major reason we haven't had nuclear war so far is that we've moved from a time back in 1945 when most people in the world welcomed the advent of nuclear weapons and thought it was great that the Japanese were defeated, or at least on the Allied side, they thought that. And the polls showed overwhelming support for U.S. use of nuclear weapons in the United States and in many other countries too. And the Soviet government was overjoyed by the U.S. use of nuclear weapons and so on. But that view soon changed. And it changed in large part due to the fact that a movement, a large mass movement against nuclear weapons and nuclear war developed that stigmatized those weapons and stigmatized nuclear war until there has become today massive revulsion against nuclear weapons and nuclear war. So that yes, diplomacy can do it, a movement can do it in league with that diplomacy, and there's no guarantee that deterrence or mutual assured destruction is going to be of much value.
What is the difference between the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons and the one that was ratified by 122 countries of the UN? In the chat, it was said they were the same treaty. Could you clarify that, please?
Sure, they are the same treaty. At the July 2017 conference, 122 nations signed that treaty. Their official representatives at the UN signed onto it. They voted for it. But for a treaty to become international law, it then has to be ratified. That is the representative. There has to be more than just a representative signing a treaty. The legislature of that government has to ratify it, or whatever final authority in that government puts its stamp of approval on that treaty has to do it. So after the signing in 2017, the treaty was then forwarded to the various nations around the world for ratification. As I pointed out, the US government and the other nuclear powers didn't even attend that UN conference because they hated the thought of what might come out of the conference. And of course, what did come out was just what they didn't want, because it basically said, you nuclear powers should get rid of your nuclear weapons. Nobody should have them. So the nuclear powers didn't even sign it, of course. But so for the United States, there's a two-step process left. The executive has to sign it. Biden, in this case, would have to sign it, and he would have to bring it to the Senate for a vote for ratification, and that means a 2/3 vote of the Senate. And that's going to be very difficult to get as things now stand.
This next question is from Mark, and it's a direct quote. Nancy Pelosi asked military leaders to withhold nuclear codes from the sociopath in chief. A few days later, the 8 Joint Chiefs of Staff unanimously issued a statement in support of the peaceful transfer of power. Can you tell us anything about this situation?
Well, it seems to me, again, as you might guess, the Joint Chiefs of Staff don't bring me to their meetings, and I've no direct line to in Washington. But my impression is that yes, Nancy Pelosi was very worried about a lunatic like Trump beginning a nuclear war. Samson bringing the temple down on everyone's heads, and her plea to the Joint Chiefs was don't let him do that. But I believe, as far as I know, the Joint Chiefs have not accepted that. I have seen nothing to confirm that they were okay with that, or they're willing to stand up to Trump to block him from doing that. Now, maybe secretly they've warned him not to do it, but I wouldn't count on his not doing it. Now, as the second part of that question, I think that the Joint Chiefs do want a peaceful transition. I think that fortunately they have decided that their they're not going to follow that the Trump mob and assault the U.S. government, and they're going to stick to the Constitution and not get involved in overthrowing the U.S. government, which denying a peaceful transition would involve.
I'm going to combine a couple because they ask about the same thing. Can you explain how we reduced nuclear weapons from 16,000 to 13,000 in the last 3 years? Are there more reductions possible without treaties? And what happened to the weapons that we reduced from?
All right. So the first part of that question was, will more be scrapped, right?
How could we? Oh, no, explain how we reduced nuclear weapons.
How we did it? Or,
Yeah.
well, the process is to take them off alert and to destroy them, to break up the warheads, and I believe they're actually used in nuclear power plants. That is, you have this radioactive material, and you have to do something with it. So they're recycling it, although they might try to bury it too. But the warhead is, well, yes, the warhead is destroyed. When they talk, well, all right, let me go a step back. We use nuclear weapons in a way that the term shouldn't be used really. What they're really talking about is destroying the nuclear warhead, the bomb part of the weapon that's put onto the missile, right? So that when you fire the missile and it hits something and the warhead goes off, the explosion takes place. The missile just carries it there. So when they destroy the weapon, they're what we call the weapon. They're destroying the warheads, although they sometimes destroy the missile or the bomber too, and that's overseen by inspectors, and the treaties of the past still provide for additional reductions. But what's happened in the last few years is that the reduction process has slowed down. Under the New START Treaty, for example, it slowed down. So they started first moving forward, but as these nations got started again on building new nuclear weapons, they started to hedge their bets. So they slowed down the reduction process, and they might just stop at this point. So hopefully that will continue, and maybe I've forgotten the number that it's slated that are slated for destruction. Maybe another few thousand by the United States. They've been taken off alert at this point. They're stored in crates or something or other, but hopefully they'll be destroyed. But the government has definitely slowed down its destruction of those weapons.
I want to read a compliment before I read the next question. This is from Mickey. Larry, I love your sense of humor and irony to leaven this difficult and scary situation. Right. I had to pass that along.
Okay, thank you, Mickey.
This is a good one. What are some strategies to reach out to Republicans and get them to rethink their position on nuclear treaties? We didn't really talk about your activism in your introduction, so I think this is a really great question for you.
Well, as I had said, while Republicans in office, especially in the Senate, and those are the crucial ones, since those are the ones who will be voting on any treaty, though not on any executive agreements or executive actions, but the senators are going to be hard to move. There may be, some movement with 1, 2, or 3 of them, but I wouldn't count on their, on most of them changing their stance. And that means it's not likely that another, 17 of them could be added to the 50 Democrats to get the 2/3 vote. But on the other hand, there are many people, citizens, who are Republican, uh, who are not anxious for a nuclear war, and I think could be convinced to join the many, many Democrats who are also hostile to nuclear war, and perhaps pressure their senators to uh, agree to an extension, for example, of the New START treaty. Why not? It's worked fine so far. The New START treaty, for example, just lowers the number of strategic nuclear weapons, the big weapons, the ICBMs, intercontinental ballistic missiles, in the arsenals of both the United States and Russia. Well, in practical terms, that means there'll be fewer intercontinental ballistic missiles aimed at the United States, right? At you and me and our fellow Republicans, right? So wouldn't that be a good thing if there are missiles aimed at Republicans and at the people of this country generally? So what's the disadvantage of having that done? It seems like a useful thing to do, particularly when there's inspection to make sure that that is done, and particularly when it's clear that both the United States and the Soviet Union have 91% of the world's nuclear weapons. Well, that would dramatically reduce nuclear dangers in the world, right? It would be a major cutback in nuclear arms in the world. So let's do it, my fellow Republicans. And there are other ways that I think people can be appealed to. And as parents of children, the notion that nuclear weapons will not kill just the enemy and just enemy soldiers or destroy the enemy's nuclear missiles, but will massacre a civilian population in other countries. And in turn, if the war is fought against another country with nuclear weapons, will massacre the civilian population in this country, civilians, including large numbers of women and children and even animals and plants, and leave the world a smoking radioactive room that can never be restored. I think that might get to some people and help convince them that nuclear war wouldn't be a good idea, and it might be good to rein in the nuclear arms race and the number of nuclear weapons in the world.
I'm going to jump in with my own question.
Sure.
You sort of inspired one. How much of a dissonance do you think there is in the Republican Party with them saying, well, this isn't an American problem, we would be bombing someplace else? Do you think that there's a big dissonance there?
Well, first of all, I think that's a pretty horrible way to view it, but it's probably not very ethical.
Right.
It's probably true that people are motivated more by self-interest and family concerns, rather narrow concerns, than broader humanitarian concerns. And for those people, I think you have to make the case that by using nuclear weapons, it's likely to trigger other nations either responding themselves to the United States if these other nations have nuclear weapons, or saying that will lower the threshold for nuclear war. And now that the United States has violated the nuclear taboo, why wouldn't other nations do the same thing? Wouldn't this then be a mad scramble, not just a nuclear arms race, but a race to wage nuclear war?
So for my friends who are not from the capital region, Paul Tonko was our congressional representative in the Albany area. He's on both the Energy Commerce Committee and the Science and Technology Committee. Do either of these positions relate to nukes? And do you know his position on nuclear disarmament?
Yeah, the nuclear weapons budget in this country, or let me rephrase that. Nuclear weapons are built, funded with budgets that come from the Pentagon and from the Energy and Water Committee. And therefore, unless I'm mistaken, it's possible I am, there's the Energy and Water Committee in Congress, in the House and in the Senate, have a good deal to say about the nuclear weapons budget, and they can put pressure on to cut that budget. Let me further add that you may not have heard, but since the Democrats have become the majority party in the U.S. Senate, the head of the all-powerful Budget Committee will be Bernie Sanders. And Bernie Sanders is one of the sharpest critics of nuclear weapons and nuclear war. And if there's anything that he does in terms of being budget chair, I would bet it's redirecting money from the Pentagon budget and particularly from the nuclear weapons budget, which Trump has increased very dramatically, to the budget for aiding poor people and providing the working people of the country with adequate relief. So I think that there are some people in key positions in Congress now, particularly now that the Democrats control the Senate, that will be very handy in terms of a fight for nuclear arms control and disarmament.
There were a lot of very happy hand gestures when you mentioned Bernie Sanders. I thought you would appreciate knowing that, Larry. I can still see them going. Do you have a sense of how important this topic is to the younger generation? Have there been any polls done?
Yes. I'm sorry to have to say it, but for young people, nuclear weapons are largely a non-issue. And the reason is that they haven't grown up during that period of mass mobilization and mass education about the nuclear menace. I grew up at a time when I was hiding under my desk at school. I was ordered to hide under my desk at school. When I could watch nuclear weapons being exploded, you can actually see it on television as the H-bombs went off in the Nevada proving grounds, Nevada desert, and so on. And there was a good deal of discussion of nuclear fallout and nuclear war. And of course, those of you who are somewhat younger than I am will recall the upsurge of the 1980s, for example, with the nuclear freeze campaign and the great fear that Reagan would initiate a nuclear war with massive demonstrations and a good deal of popular education on the nuclear menace. So unfortunately, young people haven't had that kind of political and social education. They might have heard of nuclear weapons, but I would bet most of them, in fact, most of the citizens of the United States at this point probably couldn't tell you who the 9 nuclear powers are. They probably couldn't name more than 3 or 4 of them. In fact, there was a poll in recent years in Britain among young people, and they were asked whether they thought Britain had nuclear weapons. And of course, Britain does. And was I'm trying to remember, the third nation to develop nuclear weapons, has tried nuclear submarines, and had massive demonstrations in the campaign for nuclear disarmament in the past and so on. But they asked young people today, does Britain have nuclear weapons? And most of them didn't know that. Most had no idea. So there's an education job to be done. I think once they're educated, they're likely to say, it's crazy, we don't want nuclear war. I think they if you ask them, would you want nuclear war? Would you find nuclear war acceptable? Most of them would say no. But still, they haven't been mobilized near as effectively against it as older people have. And I think that's because they haven't been educated as older people have. And indeed, another feature that you may have noticed is the graying of the peace movement, of the peace and disarmament movement. The fact that the constituency has by and large, not entirely, thank goodness, but has by and large grown older. Now, fortunately, Peace Action has managed to set up student affiliates around the state, and I believe there are now more than 20 of them. But that's rather uncommon. It's not true in other states, and young people are attracted to other causes, such as the climate, or saving the climate from catastrophe, far more than they are to the peace movement and to the disarmament movement.
I have another question from Mark. I love how he words things. Since Trump unilaterally withdrew from the Iran agreement, can Biden unilaterally rejoin without involving the Senate?
I believe so. I'm not absolutely. Oh, wait a second. Let me add, the Iran agreement is not a treaty. It is not a treaty. That was a deliberate choice by the Obama administration when it was agreed to, thanks to the fact that Obama feared that he couldn't get that through the U.S. Senate given Republican opposition. So it's an agreement. So I believe all Biden has to do is renew renew U.S. agreement to it, and he, as the executive, can do that.
That was the last question. Do we have any last-minute questions before we close for this evening?
I see the hand of Don and Mary Lathrop.
Yes. Let me see if I can invite them to unmute themselves. Oh, nope, you're unmuted. You can talk.
You can hear me?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, I'd like to very much to speak just for a couple of minutes, no, less than that, to what Larry was talking about younger people, both here and in Great Britain. And Mary and I have been to Japan 11 times, 10 of which were to bring people back here to tell the stories of the A-bomb survivors. We've had 4 such survivors stay with us for a little bit, and we stayed at homes with them over there and so on. But I just got a thing yesterday from one of our volunteers who was older than usual. I think she was in her 70s. And she has, and it just came yesterday, about 8 stories, 8 survivors telling their stories. And I haven't a chance to look at one of them. It looked like it was going to be pretty good. If anybody would like to I'll give you my email. And then if you write to me, I will send you these unedited stories of survivors telling their own stories. And at least in English, the 2 I looked at. And I think you might be able to use them to show them to younger people that you come in contact with at nearby schools or churches or whatever. And that would be a good idea, I think. So all you have to do is write to me. It's D. Lathrop, Lathrop, Donald Lathrop, but just D. Lathrop, at Berkshire Community College, berkshirecc.edu. D. Lathrop at berkshirecc.edu. And then I will send you that material, and you can share it if it looks good to you. The only other thing is that there are demonstrations on the 22nd at General Dynamics in Pittsfield at 9 o'clock. And then at noontime in Northampton, there'll be another set of demonstrations on the very day that this treaty. Yeah, I don't know. You probably have them in the Albany area too. But, anyhow, I'd be glad to send that along too, if anybody wants to know.
Sure. Thank you, John. I want to mention to you that you're welcome to get on the Upper Hudson Peace Action's mailing list or to join it. And I believe Janine will be contacting you, so you'll have a chance to do that in the future. Are there any last minute questions or comments?
No, but Don, if you could take a minute to talk about what your program is. I think we have some out-of-towners and they might not be familiar with your program. So could you just take a minute to talk about it, please?
Sure, thanks. We were working on a movie about peacemaking back in 1985. We met a young Japanese woman who had come to New York when Reagan was president, and she translated for Hibakusha, a survivor, and in Central Park where there were 1 million folks. Anyhow, she came to live with us for 1.5 years, and on 1 year's Spanish, she speaks Spanish, and plus she talked to 17,000 people, mostly in this country, but also in Colombia, Costa Rica, and Panama. We were so impressed. We went over there with her. We did 10 times, and we interviewed people all around. So we ended up not a very big program. 57 volunteers came though over 20 years, and they talked to 11,845 times. They talked to over 371,000 people. So it's just a little program, but and it came to an end. But it was fantastic. We thought we went back for the 11th time just to say goodbye to all our friends. That's so fascinating. And you're not only friendship, we've come to deeply love many of these people who 70 years before were our arch enemies. I was 11 years old when the bomb was dropped on Hiroshima. So I knew these were people to hate. And we've come out to find that these were people to love. And of course, a lot of it depends on their knowing English.
Right.
We haven't sent any volunteers here to speak only Japanese.
I think it was called the Never Again program?
Campaign, but it's come to a halt. On the other hand, we were in contact with a woman in Hiroshima at a high school, and we were looking into the possibility of them sending, or at least communicating to high school students here. The problem mostly, pardon me, by email or by something like this. And the only problem now is that all the schools over there, just like here, are having trouble with the virus. And so hopefully that will come along too.
Yeah. So do we have any further questions or comments?
No, people are just chattering amongst themselves, which is wonderful to see. Do you have any closing thoughts, Larry?
Well, I want to thank everybody for coming to this event. I hope we can stay in touch. We do plan to have future speakers, so we'll try to contact you in that case. And I hope that you will not only be horrified by the arms race that I outlined to you that persists, but also heartened by the possibilities in the future for challenging it and turning that around. It's been done before, it can be done again, and we can finally move to the day when there are no nuclear weapons. And I urge you to get involved in that kind of campaign. So thanks again for coming.
Thank you.